the people that hate my work are just as important as the people that like my work, because there's nothing worse in the world than making art that just nobody gives a shit about. So I just as much like the people that hate the work as I like the people that like the work, because it makes people feel something.
Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, Leadheads, to the Pencil Pushers Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the love of the hand-drawn arts. I am, of course, your humble host, Mike Rosado, with another fantastic episode for you. Today, I'm thrilled to be talking with a lion in the contemporary art world, the one and only Cleon Peterson. For those that don't know our man of the hour, he is a painter, a muralist, a sculptor, who has come a long way from his years as a graphic artist working for skateboard companies, where he's cut his teeth in the early years of his budding career, to now creating a style and name that has allowed his prolific body of work to be exhibited in high-profile museums and galleries all over the world. Cleon's work is graphic in style and substance, and he is an artist who's not afraid to step into that role of what a true artist actually has been tasked to do, which is to produce work that pushes you to think, feel, and perhaps even move into action. So ladies and gents, I invite you to sit in with us, relax, and enjoy our chat with Cleon. Cleon, welcome, my friend. It's an honor to have you on the show. How are you doing?
Good, man. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely, man. It's probably only been a few months before I actually had an idea of who you were. I was just kind of doing your cursory droning, scrolling through Instagram, and found your page. And it kind of started out being just strictly attracted to the beauty of the work itself, the aesthetic as a craft. But as I dove into the work a little bit more, I started to realize that there was so much more meaning behind it. And I've been enjoying discovering a little bit more about you. I mean, it's still kind of difficult to find information about you and your work and the like. And so I figured this would be a great opportunity to just kind of face-to-face, just kind of talk to you about your work and learn a little bit about how you came to be where you are now. So typically how we usually go about this for people who are coming from various degrees of kinds of art, we usually like to try to start out with just learning a little bit more about where you came from, where you were born, and how you got into art. So I know you were born in Seattle in 1973. Can you tell us a little bit about how art became something of meaning to you?
I've always drawn and painted and been interested in making things, I guess. When I was a little kid, I was sick a lot, and so I had a lot of time on my hands. I had asthma really bad when I was a kid, and so I'd like be missing school a lot, and that gave me a chance to draw all the time. And then because I'd miss, days of school or weeks of school, I was always really behind in school. So that kind of made me like not do well in school. So I got to draw more in school because I was kind of like not paying attention or drawing on the desks and stuff like that. And then I was also into, I had this friend of mine named Andy, and he and I used to be into like playing army and stuff. And we draw like battle scenes.
Right.
And
so was this, were you like using like the G.I. Joe action figures, or like just the classic sort of still figures, or just actually playing army with like camouflage outfits and stuff like that?
Oh, we used to go down to like the army surplus stores in Seattle and buy actual like artillery belts and like army helmets. We had all that stuff, you know?
Yep.
Make fake wooden guns.
Right.
We'd tie our little brothers up in trees and put them in cages and stuff like that. And then we did play with G.I. Joes, but it was more like these, there were these games back then that were kind of like, almost like role-playing games or offshoots of D&D or something, that were called like Panzer Blitz. And they were like games that were like too complicated for us at that time, but we got we were into them because of the art and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And then the photo, like, and then we were also into like those Time Life books of World War II. I don't know if you ever saw those. They used to have like a entire like collection of these things. And
Yeah, they were
I think,
fairly large format magazines, right?
yeah, they were hardbound books though,
Oh, okay.
actually.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
They probably have them in the library still. I haven't looked for them in a while, but I don't know why we were. I mean, I guess my friend Andy's dad was in Vietnam and his
Okay.
uncle, so like we'd always talk about it, and I just kept on drawing and painting.
How old were you at this point?
That was like second grade, third grade,
Okay.
so pretty early.
Yeah.
When I got older, a little bit older, like right around where you're going into middle school, I kind of started taking art lessons. A lady started teaching me. Like I was weird. I was just like, for some reason, just always making art and stuff and painting.
Mm-hmm.
And I started hanging out with some like older people and doing life drawing and painting landscapes and stuff like that. I mean, that led then to me going and studying in college and stuff like that pretty early, actually. I didn't go to high school. Instead, I just went to college. I don't know, man. I've always been it's been my thing because I wasn't very good at anything else, basically.
Right. But you obviously had an obsession. I mean, so I think I was, I saw in one interview I know you had a one-man show. Where was that? That was at a Unitarian church. Is that right?
Yeah. I made like 50 paintings. I think when I was, I don't know. I think it was before I was 15. So I had that show at this Unitarian church.
Jesus.
Yeah. And I used to draw like I looked at the French Impressionists and like faux painters
Right.
and stuff like that for a bit. I think my mom kind of like, for a while she was encouraging me. And so like she'd give me money to buy skateboards if I'd like drew flower pictures and drew like pictures of like trees and stuff like that. So
Right.
there was a lot during that period. There was a lot of trees and flowers that I drew.
Nice. Yeah, I know. I think I saw some video. I was like, wow, it's so vastly different. It's so colorful, lots of different colors. It definitely had that vibe of French Impressionism.
Yeah, it's probably, it's so sad that kids are influenced by their parents, right?
Totally. Yeah. So you definitely felt that tug, I guess, from your mom, who was very encouraging, and then obviously she's kind of giving you the bait. So, if you paint like this, I'll get you a skateboard. But were you enjoying painting in that style, or was it just like, I'm just trying to get this done?
Okay, so I did those shows. I did that show at the Unitarian Church, and then they wrote an article about me in the newspaper, and then I became like kind of this weird like child prodigy kind of thing, like
Yep.
Doogie Howser-esque kind of kid,
Right.
When I got a show at a community college after that, then somebody actually in downtown Seattle has kind of like a locals only kind of art scene, and somebody had offered me to do an art show at that point with like these flowers pictures that my mom had me drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this like total identity crisis, and I was like, man, if I do this, like there's no turning back. I'll never make like, this is not me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this was like, say when I was about 15 years old, I'd kind of like painted myself into a corner of like flowers and landscapes.
Right.
And all the time knowing that like that isn't what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And then that was like the point where I was like, am I going to do this for the rest of my life? Or am I going to quit this and like explore what I am really about,
Yeah.
Try to figure out my identity or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, can I assume that you were a normal, it seems like you were a normal kid out skateboarding, being outside, doing outdoor stuff. I'm assuming that you were being influenced creatively beyond what French Impressionism was providing you. Like what else were you what were you getting turned on by creatively at that point?
Well, I mean, we go down to this place called Fallout Records, and it was like a skateboarding shop that had like punk rock music, and they sold underground comics there because Fantagraphics was up in Seattle.
Nice.
So
yeah.
I was starting to look at that stuff, and I was like starting to get into. I mean, that's kind of where where I wanted to be at, you know. But I was still like so young that I was a little bit like I wasn't there yet. You know what I mean? I wasn't like bold enough to be like a total rebel. You know what I mean? Like I was still under the wing a little bit at that point.
Yeah.
But that's where I was inclined to go, I think, you know. And then I was also we had gone to New York. My mom took me on a trip to New York, and I went walking around down in Soho back then and looking at galleries and stuff. And I was into like all the kind of stuff that is really old hat at this point, like, you know, the Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns and all those like kind of American painters or de Kooning. I really like de Kooning a lot.
Sure.
But then I was also looking at stuff like Leon Golub. Jacob Lawrence was a family friend of ours, so like we hung out with him a lot when we were kids. And I thought he was like the coolest, and because he lived in Washington, and I still think his work is amazing. And
I'm not familiar. I should check that out.
Yeah, and then I'd seen stuff like, I mean, even like old Damien, the first stuff that Damien Hirst did and Jeff Koons, like when he was doing like vacuum cleaners and boxes and stuff like that, and sharks and tanks and, you know, all that stuff, you know. I was paying attention to all of that, even though I wasn't making stuff like that. I didn't have the confidence at that point, or kind of know myself enough, I think, to make stuff like that was, you know, when you're 15, you know, you're not going to be making like a Jeff Koons Chicholina piece of art, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So what happened next? So you took that visit there, but then you wound up going to school in New York, right?
Yeah, that was so I quit going to high school, and I went to a small college called Cornish in Seattle. And then I went there for a couple of years, and then
with a focus on art, or just trying to get some
painting.
college. Okay.
I was into painting. Yeah. I wanted to be a painter more than anything. But you know, like when you're 15, you don't really, it's like you got to kind of like figure out what you're all about, you know? So, I mean, at that point, I was kind of like getting into drugs and stuff when I was about 15, 16, 17. When I think I was like 17 or a little bit older, I went to New York. I quit going to Cornish in Washington, and I got an opportunity. I got a scholarship to go to study at Pratt, which is where that Jacob Lawrence guy went. That's kind of what influenced me to go over there.
Okay.
And study in New York, because I just thought like that New York was going to be really more exciting than Seattle was. Seattle was kind of small town, you know. So I wanted to go to where the action was, I guess.
Yeah. And how did that go?
Pretty crazy there in the 1990s. Like I got into a lot of trouble over there.
Yeah.
Started doing heroin and stuff over there. Got into drugs really heavy.
Yeah.
And then kind of on the sideline, I was doing art a little bit, you know, like studying and walking around the city and looking at stuff, you know. But I mean, even then, you know, 17 years old is like, you're at college and you're in this big city and you're like, how do I fit into this place? You know, it's huge. It's crazy.
Plus you think about it, you think about it now as an adult, and you think 17 is just so young, man. I mean, to be in a city and, you know, you could get sucked in so easily.
Yeah. I was looking for trouble more at that point,
right.
You know, like, I mean, which is good actually, because I think it was like super important for me to go there, you know what I mean? And to like figure out what I was all about.
Yeah.
So it was a good opportunity for me to get away from my family and for me to kind of become an individual, find out who I was.
Yeah. So you were there for how long before you moved back? Because I think you were only there for a few years before you went back to the West Coast. Is that right?
Yeah, I lasted about 2 years of, you know, being totally drug addled, and like then I went to rehab out there, and on like in kind of like an emergency situation. And then I dropped out of school, or took a leave of absence from school, and went back to Seattle, kind of, which is where I was like, it was the first time I'd kind of like stopped doing drugs for a little bit and getting my life together for a second. Like I spent about half a year over there. And at that time I kind of was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this painting thing. I was intimidated, and I didn't really know what I was going to make, but I knew, because I'd been like really deeply involved in the skateboarding world, and my brother was a skateboarder. I knew that I was still excited by that. And so when I got back from New York, I'd made all these paintings in New York and everything, and I took like Polaroid photos of the paintings, and I sent the Polaroid photos down to this, like, in the mail. This is like pre,
scanning and email and right.
Like we weren't carrying cell phones around, this was like, I mean, this is like, sounds like really ancient. Like I'll tell my kids, like, there was a time, when not everybody didn't just walk around with like a walkie-talkie on them, you know what I mean? You weren't able to communicate with anybody. It's like you'd have to send it with the actual envelope in the post office. Yeah. So I sent these Polaroid images down to San Diego to this dude that owned Foundation Skateboards, Todd Swank, like a bunch of Polaroids of paintings that I'd done. And he was like, come down here to San Diego and you can work for me and design skateboards. And at that time, like,
did your artwork, the stuff that you sent over, did it reflect that, that sort of graphic sensibility at that time, or was it, more painterly?
No, it wasn't graphic like that, but it was actually kind of similar to what I'm doing now. It was figurative, and then there were like a lot of words in the paintings that I'd written in there. Yeah. But there was more like form to the figures. Like I had painted them like dimensionally, like they were round, they weren't just flat. So, and then they were very kind of like, in the same way that they are now, kind of like a little bit deviant. They were kind of like dark, and like cynical, and kind of like that, that kind of thing. It's actually very similar to what I'm doing now.
Is it? Okay.
It just looked different, but the ideas are still the same. Yeah. So that was kind of like that whole culture, like, of skateboarding. I don't know if you're familiar with it during the 1990s, but like, I guess it kind of had the roots in like punk rock music or like tricksterism, I think, in culture, and like wanting to be anything but what your parents were, you know? Totally. Like it was a great subculture, and you could be as bad as you wanted to be, really, like, in that culture. And because we were making stuff or because skateboards weren't being sold at that time in malls and stuff, they were being sold at like punk rock or like record stores and stores where they'd sell like underground comics
or skate shops.
Or skate shops. Like, it wasn't like you were having to kind of be politically correct with the artwork. It was like a real subcultural thing going on. Totally. So it was a cool scene. I'm glad that I grew up in that world,
Yeah, so they saw obviously something there that would be perfect for what they were doing there. So they invited you to become sort of like kind of a contract artist, or somebody on hand as like a full-time employee.
I guess, I mean, I lived on the couch in the warehouse, so I guess I was a full-time employee. So like, it was me.
About as full-time as it could possibly get.
Yeah, exactly. Full-time, no shower.
Right.
So, I mean, I had nothing, do you know what I mean? So it was like the perfect opportunity all I wanted to do is get away from my family, you know what I mean? So it was like the perfect opportunity for me to go down there, live in a warehouse with some other guys, make art all the time, and just be like on my own. Do you know what I mean? With
Yeah.
nobody bothering me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was me and this guy named Yogi Proctor, who's another great artist, and then this guy named Aaron Springer, who actually he was he ended up, I think he did like a bunch of SpongeBob and stuff like that, like later on.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny. So we were all down there kind of like drawing skateboards together and just being like, just generally bad, I think is pretty fun.
Nice. So that was mainly what you were doing in the 90s. And then I think it was towards the late 90s you started to get involved with working with Shepard Fairey, right?
Yeah, I made artwork and then kept working for different skateboard companies throughout the 90s. And then eventually what happened is I ended up getting arrested down in San Diego and then going to jail. And then I was living in my car. And then they sent me from jail to this like halfway house kind of place. And from that halfway house place, like I'd actually met Shepard before.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, you got to go get a job. Cause I was there for about a year and a half in that place.
Mm-hmm.
And then at first they were like, you got to get a job and go work at like Ralph's or a coffee shop or something like that. So I tried going out and like applying for those kind of jobs, you know?
Yeah.
And because I'd never had a job like that before, like nobody was hitting me back. And so I like in pure desperation, I went over to like Shepard's place and I was like, look, Shepard, can I work with you? And he was like, yeah, man, I'll give you this like little area in my studio. It wasn't like I was actually working for Shepard, but like whenever he had some like extra stuff that came in, because at that time he was doing t-shirts and graphic design, basically. I'd been doing like what I thought was like illustration, you know, at that time.
Yeah.
And then Shepard was like one step up. He was doing graphic design.
Right.
And you get more money for doing graphic design, you know,
sure,
than illustration.
That's still sometimes, that's many times still the case today.
Yeah. So I was like, damn, I got to get into this graphic design thing because like, I mean, literally like the skateboard thing in like 1992, they were paying $300 per graphic for a board, which took a week to make, right?
Wow.
Because you had to cut ruby litho.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know what that is, but this is like primitive stuff, you know, like doing hand separations for silk screens and stuff.
Okay.
It took like a week to do that. Today, I think they're still paying $300 a graphic for skateboards, you know? So the industry is brutal. And I saw like that, I don't know, man. I just didn't think that like my whole life was going to be like, I was going to be able to cut it doing that. You know what I mean? So I was like, I'm going to move up and I'm going to try to like go hit up Shepard and he's going to give me a job. And then I can do some t-shirts and some like branding and stuff like that, learn how to do that, get into that stuff. So we worked together doing that for a bit in 1998.
In the midst of all this happening, when you're still, you know, maybe trying to recover here and there, are you still being fairly prolific with your art? I mean, are you still hustling pretty hard with it?
Oh man, I did like hundreds of skateboards, I think, at that time.
Okay.
But I'd kind of given up on painting because I just didn't think it was ever going to happen for me because I just thought like it was, I missed my opportunity, you know what I mean? And like I blew it because got into drugs and everything. So I just like kind of might as well do this. Like, I mean, I always wanted to do art because that was what I was good at. So I figured like, I'll just do this, like drawing these skateboards. It was creative and it was like, and at least I was drawing and everything and it was fun and I really loved it. So, but I always wanted to be a painter, you know?
So what happened next?
So I thought, I mean, after I worked for Shepard for like a year or something like that, I basically decided to go back to school because I dropped out of Pratt.
Yeah.
And I had a friend that went to a place called Art Center up in Pasadena.
Okay.
And I was like, and at that point, I mean, I knew what Shepard was doing and he was doing the design. And I thought like, okay, I'm going to try to make like a career out of this, you know, where And I felt like I needed more training, like in terms of like, I wanted to learn typography and, formal like design chops, I guess,
Yeah. So you saw him for a year. You kind of observed him and apprentice, I guess, as it were, with him for a while, and that gave you information as far as how you could, I guess, be a little bit more entrepreneurial with the work. Is that right?
I mean, really, like Shepard and I were kind of like like I was like a creative director over at Foundation, and then he was just doing his thing over here, and we just kind of like came together. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was like his assistant or
Gotcha.
something like that at that time. It was
Yeah.
like we were just working in the same zone. You know what I mean?
Nice.
But like, he gave me the idea that like, it wasn't even the idea. Like I saw it like through the work that he was doing that like you could have an agency or, make it into a business or something like that. And so like, I just knew that like I needed more training in order to do something like that. So I went back to school up in Pasadena and studied design at that time, figuring that like I was going to be a designer for the rest of my life.
Gotcha.
But after I finished that degree, like 3 years later, I was like, man, I don't know if I could do this, because it started getting real stuffy. Like they're pushing people towards advertising.
Yeah,
and
it's a whole other zone.
Because I loved the way that skateboarding and say doing music stuff and doing posters and everything, it was like a fun area of design to be working in.
Yeah.
It wasn't like selling like stuff to people that they don't need and trying to be clever and like devious in that way,
Yeah.
I basically wanted to do something that was meaningful, I kind of left there after I finished Art Center. I was like, I could just either go work for an agency or like go work for a design place.
Did you get a degree as well, like in graphic design, or what was the?
Yeah, I got an undergraduate in graphic design.
Okay.
But then I was like, I think I'm going to study again and get a graduate degree. So I went to a place called Cranbrook that's like, it's got a 2D design program, but it's more of like an avant-garde design program where it's more like, instead of it being like a service industry kind of thing, where the designers, the whole design thing is messed up, because people think it's my duty to kind of like do good in the world. It's my duty to like be positive. It's my duty to like shine shit basically all the time. Do you know what I mean? And like, just deliver some like, cause you're working for the devil. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, you're really like, convincing yourself that you're doing something good for the society when you're not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's basically how I saw it. Or you're doing something meaningful and you're not getting paid anything.
Yeah, definitely.
Those are the compromises.
The cool thing is that since it's 100% still that in many ways, and the cool thing is that in today's world you have graphic designers that can essentially create their own thing and not necessarily do stuff for clients that's just trying to sell the next perfume. And so the cool thing is that I think there are a lot more entrepreneurial graphic designers out there, and so I'm hopeful in that respect. But it still has inherent problems that bleed into it, unfortunately. So.
Well, like that's why I was always trying to, like, when I went to grad school, my motivation was that I was going to like try to do like cultural stuff, like design art books and like, work for museums and stuff like that,
Yeah.
So I've done a little bit of that too, or music design or something like that. There's little zones in there that you can work in.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clearly I can see a very graphic side to your aesthetic, and I'm not surprised at all to see where it's all kind of like brewed from. how did everything just sort of blossom into what it's become now? I mean, doing these large scale pieces where you are now.
I'll tell you exactly how it happened, because it was a weird situation that happened, right? Or how I got back into art. I was designing a book with a lady that owns a gallery, and I was designing it at my house, like after I'd finished grad school and while I was working for Shepherd. And she came over to my house to see the design and saw the paintings that I'd made during the last critique of my at grad
School.
school.
Yeah.
And they were just sitting like leaning up against the wall, and she was like, man, I could sell those. I could put those in a group show that I'm going to have here. And so I was like, yeah, man, that would be cool. I let her take the paintings, put them up in the show, and or Kathy Grayson and Jeffrey Deitch bought the paintings and put them in a show that they were doing in New York called Mail Order Monsters. And so when that happened, I was like, man, I have to, like, this is my opportunity to get back into painting again, you know, which is what I've always wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I just jumped into it, and I started making paintings again. And then after that show happened, that little group show, like Marcia Goldberg that owns New Image Art said, do you want to do a full show? And I worked for a while on that, and then I did a full show. And the great thing about that, actually the kind of liberating thing I think about doing that show was that because I had a design job, I wasn't dependent on the art selling at the art show. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was just like, I'm going to go and I'm going to just do like whatever I want to do, you know?
Nice.
This was my opportunity because I didn't have to sell the work, you know, because I had another job. I was like, I'm just going to make exactly what I want, not compromise, like not hold back.
Yep.
And just try to put something that I like out into the world, you know? Through doing that, like that's what opened up like every opportunity that I've gotten, you know, because I didn't kind of self-edit, you know what I mean? I just like put what I make out there, and that was a good thing, you know.
Going to school for graphic design, do you feel like that was a value to you in terms of how you execute your work today?
I mean, totally.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole different level of composition and compositional understanding that you learn from graphic design than is anything that you learn in painting, basically.
Yep. Totally
like
agree.
Balance and like kind of positive negative space and all, and this subtlety of line and motion and gesture.
Yep.
Like it's like so technical. I wouldn't be doing what I do now if I hadn't learned that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think being a graphic designer helps you be a better artist in general. So anyway, so now things are really starting to kick, right? You're really starting to get things rolling in terms of getting the confidence. You now have the one good thing that having a graphic design job is giving you, which is the opportunity to actually do the work that you want to do outside of it. How did things start to move forward from there?
I mean, I just literally kept plugging away and doing little shows, and eventually things started selling. And I literally waited until the last minute, like to quit my graphic design job before I just started doing art full time. I was working like 5 days a week, then I was working 4 days a week, then I was working 3 days a week, 2 days, 1 day. And then, you know, I was like, I can't, or it's, my time is better spent painting than designing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I finally like let it go at the end of all that. I'm very like I like security, you know, so I wasn't just about to like the day I had a show, quit my job and like, and I had kids and stuff, you know what I mean? So
Oh, wow.
it wasn't
Okay.
even it wouldn't have been responsible for me to do that. So it was a mild transition that happened over probably 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So your style is obviously very graphic in nature, but also what pushes that is your very very minimalist use of color. How did that come into play, or was that sort of a natural transformation in your work as well?
I mean, I think it came from like doing the screen printing with the
Yeah,
skateboards and stuff,
yeah,
you know, because we'd had to be really efficient with the colors and everything. It was so much more expensive to print with more colors.
hmm
And then I tend to like things that are more minimal, actually, like even in design, you know, like things that are very stark and kind of brutal, I guess.
yeah,
Like if you're talking about maybe architecture or something, like
hmm
very hard lined and very like, I mean, just the subject matter that I paint lends itself to that kind of
a
language
hundred
in
percent.
the in that kind of color. So I'm very, you know, when I was a kid and I was doing those landscapes and I was interested in the fauves and it was about like color is emotion, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so I have an easier time controlling the emotional impact of the piece if it's just a few colors rather than it's a lot of colors.
mm
If I go with a lot of colors, I end up, it feels like party time or something. It
yeah,
just defaults to that, you
yeah,
know? Like I have a really hard time actually having a or conveying like a like really kind of violent, aggressive mood when it's a lot of subtle variations in color, you know?
totally. Yeah,
The visual impact of the way the thing looks and the way it makes you feel is why I do what I do.
yeah. Yeah, and so much of your subject matter these days is definitely, as you said, it obviously lends itself to the kind of stylistic choices that you make, and talking a little bit more about this, about the actual subject matter itself, where it's been quoted as, there's a quote that describes it as clashing figures symbolizing a struggle between power and submission, and I think that's such a great way to describe the work itself. How did how did your work, the actual subject matter itself, become such a dominant part of what you put out there?
Okay, so it goes back to when I'd been arrested and I had to start my life all over again and everything. And I'd spent like almost a decade like running around on the streets and kind of like being really fucked up, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
if you are a drug addict, you know, and you're hanging out with drug addicts all the time, you're gonna see some shit, you know what I mean? And
yeah,
like if you're living that way, you're gonna experience those things. Do you know what I mean?
oh
It
yeah,
gets bad, you know?
yeah,
And going to jail and everything, and then leaving jail and then being like part of the system and like having to kind of deal with that. If you get wrapped up with a case in the system or something, you can, you know, you end up hanging out with these people that have been like in these programs where you see people that have been in this with the same number. That's the first time they got arrested for 30 years, you
yeah,
know, they never get out
yeah,
because you just keep reoffending and everything. You're also kind of marginalized in society. You're kind of an outcast, you know, like you can't even get a job. Like when I left that place, I couldn't get a job working at a coffee shop, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Because of my history.
yeah. And then that's why a lot of times people who are in prison, they wind up going straight back to prison because that's their comfort level, because nobody wants to hire them, nobody understands them, nobody respects them. So they feel the most comfortable just going back into prison.
Yeah, or you just get stuck in that position because like say they're testing you every week, and if you slip or something, you get tested dirty and then they throw you right back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's pretty, and especially in the 90s, it was like, you know, the punishment was like insane. Like they almost gave me 3 years, you know, for being arrested once. So it's brutal. And so after I left that, and when I went to graduate school, I started reading a bunch of philosophy and and about deviance, about social deviance, and about punishment in our world, and like power and stuff like that. And I started relating to that stuff that I was reading.
Yeah.
After that, the first paintings that I made were literally about kind of what I experienced, you know, like being under the thumb of the penal system and everything, and being on the streets and being around all those people on the streets and all that crooked stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So I made paintings about all of that for, you know, a few years. And those were like city scenes with police, like beating people, and like drug dealers stealing from each other, or like violence going on, you know, all stuff that you see every day if you're in that world. You know, when I was a kid, like I hadn't experienced, I had experienced life, you know, but it took going through all of this stuff for me to kind of have a story to tell, you know, or my own life experiences there. I had a real perspective on the world. And this gave me a perspective on the world. You know, this was my voice.
It's obvious that your subject matter provides a lot of potential critique. Have you any personal stories where you have people have come up to you and had a very positive response to the artwork that you've put out to the world?
Yeah, I think like what I paint is I think of it as like a realism in a way, you know? So the second part of that is where people feel like they see what I'm doing, and then they don't see very many people expressing this world, you know, in art. Art to me is like about kind of finding some kind of truth, you know what I mean, in the world. And and that can be through humor or violence, or expressing a reality or something. And then so I think that some people think it's kind of refreshing to actually see an honesty, I think, in the work, you know.
Yep.
Maybe it doesn't speak to everybody's experiences, but this is stuff that's going on in the world that, like, a lot of times people do experience some of those things, and then maybe they ignore those things, you know. Like a lot of the work that I did in this newer stage of things is like me looking out at the world and seeing like that, man, we're in these kind of these endless wars, you know, where power is being exerted over people, and people are being subjugated and like othered and all this other stuff. And
the sense of normalization of it as well.
Yeah, or just like a lack of actually, because I think what we don't experience it firsthand, so we don't actually think that we're involved in it in a way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or that, so there's like an apathy towards it, like it's other people's problems, not our problem. You know?
Yeah.
And but you know, like the people that hate my work are just as important as the people that like my work, you know, because there's nothing worse in the world than making art that just nobody gives a shit about. Do you know what I mean? So I just as much like the people that hate the work as I like the people that like the work, because it makes people feel something, you know?
Yeah.
Because like, wouldn't it be sad if you made something that just was likable, or this was mundane? I mean, that's the worst kind of art, right?
Yeah.
Like you want, or at least for me, I always like things that are like create conflict in me, you know, make me look at it and think like, what the hell's going on there, you know? And like, God, do I see myself in that work?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, how do I fit into this?
Yeah. The idea of being triggered is always a positive thing. I think a lot of people think of it as a negative, but if you're being triggered by it, that means that there's something inside of you that connects to it.
I think it's important for us to like understand that we all have the potential to be evil, you know, and even through complicity, you know, like to support badness in this world, and I mean, just politically right now in this world that we're living in right now, I think there's some of that happening, like the problems that are happening that we see, like they're not other people's problems, they're our problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if we can take ownership for those things, like that's how we can find solutions.
Yep.
If we just avoid everything and like don't actually confront it and just try to kind of have like a cultural amnesia, like we're never going to make progress,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty obvious that we've got our work cut out for us. But the good news is that, I mean, I'm a huge supporter of what you're doing. I think the artwork that you're putting out there is being very blunt, and it's helping us actually look at the kind of things that we don't necessarily want to look at. And I think that's very, very important. And I'm very excited that you're doing it. And I hope it inspires others to do the same as well. And on that note, let's talk a little bit about what you got coming up next.
Well, right now in Toulouse, you can go see my artwork at L'Abattoir, the museum there. It's a pretty cool show with Todd James and Peter Saul.
Nice. And then what's next? What's next up for you afterwards?
Oh, and then I've got another show actually that's in Turkey right now too.
Oh, okay.
That's coming down at the end of the month, I think. So I'm just making I'm getting ready for another show. So I think maybe next October I'll have the show. Anything
new in terms of your style, changing anything up in particular? Are you moving into kind of a new realm at all, or?
I just painted some landscapes again, which I'm excited about, actually.
Nice.
I'm really excited about them. I think this whole like environmental, like I wanted to kind of capture the violence that's going on in our world environmentally. It evolves, from my world to the bigger political world to the environment now.
Yeah, huge
back again.
Huge issue. Yeah, I'd love to have you back again to talk a little bit deeper about that. I've certainly got a lot of thoughts on that as well. But Cleon, I really appreciate you taking the time, man. I know you're super busy, and I know you got a family. So
thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's been great.
Awesome, man. You have a great night, and hope to see you soon.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.